Hello everybody, Andrew Blake from the digitalaudiomanual.com. Today let's talk about some controller lane tips in Cubase. What is a controller lane? If you look at Retrolog, which I have here, and I hold a key down, and let's say I go over to the pitch bend over here on the left with my mouse as I'm holding the key and I move this, I get that kind of sound. If I move Retrolog out of the way, what a controller lane allows us to do is draw that movement in, kind of like automation. I have some MIDI notes up here, and then I've drawn in some pitch bend. If I play those, I get this. You can see there's a line here. It separates the MIDI notes I'm looking at. And by the way, I'm looking at the key editor, which means back in the project, I took my MIDI part and double-clicked on it. Looking at this MIDI part, the MIDI information up here, below this line is this controller information. And in this case, it shows pitch bend. Over on the left, there's a drop-down list, and you can choose any other kind of information you want. You can see right here it has the option for pitch bend, so I clicked on that. In my controller lane, I can take tools like my draw tool or my line tool, and then I can quickly draw in different kinds of controller information just by clicking and dragging. And that will affect how the synth is being played. In fact, if I bring the synth back in for a second, without actually touching this pitch bend over here on the left, as I play the song, you can see the pitch bend actually moves because the controller data is moving this. So that's what a controller lane is, and that's an example of controller data on the lane. Once we've drawn some data, we can right-click over in this area and say select all the events on the lane, hit our delete key, and that removes all of that information. And then the track will play without the pitch bend in this case. Now the first thing we want to understand when we draw in some data is that we have these points on the data itself. If I go back to my select tool, I hover over any of these points and I click, I can then move them around the screen however I want. And this is dictated by how the snap is set. Right now I'm at an eighth note, move it to a quarter note by spinning it with my mouse. Now when I drag these points, they move by a quarter note. This option is only available for the pitch bend. But you'll notice if you go to any point and then move it up or down, it freely moves without any kind of snapping. But on the left, you have the option to turn snapping on, and then there's a grid that shows up, and your points will snap to that grid. If you want to change that grid, hit the little gear, then you can spin your mouse over and create whatever kind of grid you want, and then your points snap to that. If you deactivate the snapping option, again, the points freely move. A fun option to take advantage of, if you go to your list of different controllers and choose the one that says Articulations and Dynamics, switch to the pencil tool, you can actually start drawing in dynamics. Every time you draw in a dynamic, there's a triangle in the upper left. It allows you to change the dynamics. But the easiest way is to go over the articulation. You can actually spin your mouse to make an easy change. I'll make this piano, leave that mezzo forte, move this down to mezzo piano, then I'll move this all the way up to forte. And if your instrument responds to this, you can get this kind of result. Controllers and automation in many ways are the same thing. Sometimes you may want to treat your controllers like automation. For example, I have this modulation data written here. If I come out of the key editor and then take that same MIDI event in the project, hold Control and right-click on it, come up to the option that says Functions. At the bottom of the sub-menu is an option that says Extract the MIDI Automation. If I click on that and then go to the option that says Show Hide the Automation in the lower left of the track, now I have the modulation, but it's on an automation lane. And that data can be redrawn or edited like any other kind of automation. At the bottom of the window of the controllers, there's a drop-down arrow. In that menu, you have an option that says Type of New Controller Events, and you have the option between Step and Ramp. Step is going to give you a lot more points. Ramp is going to give you more straight lines. I'm going to choose the option for Ramp. And we want to look now at the tool option for the line. When you click the line tool, you have all these different kind of options that are variations of the line. First up is a line. If I click and drag in a controller lane, that's exactly what I get is a straight line. If I go to my next option, I have a parabola, which is kind of like a curved line. The next option we have is a sine wave. And then you have another option for a triangle. You just click and drag these to draw them in. And then the option for a square. And then the final option is called paint, which allows you to freestyle your line. Now, the next thing to understand is how the Shift and the Control key act as modifiers with these various shapes. Let's go back to the sine shape. When I click and drag the sine shape, let's say I've made 3 shapes. If I hold Shift from that point it will stretch those shapes. And I can stretch it forwards or backwards, raise it or lower it. If I let go of shift, I can add another point. Then I can hold shift and stretch it. If I don't let go of my mouse and I switch to holding down my control key, I can now move the shape as it is back and forth. So if I want to start from the peak, I can move to the peak, or if I want to start from the valley, I can start from that. Wherever I want to start the shape from, then I can go back to my shift again and I can stretch that out. Or I can let go of the shift and continue to draw more shapes. Once I've drawn them, I let go of my mouse and then I have those shapes. I'll switch to the triangle. If I start clicking and dragging the triangle, say I make 3 of those, hold shift, and I can stretch those 3 out. If I move to my control key, I can move them back and forth, draw a few more in if I want, and then let go. I switch to the square shape, click and drag 2 of those, hold shift and stretch them out, hold control and move them back and forth wherever I want, continue drawing, and then let go. The next move you're going to want to know, draw a shape, then hold control and alt, and that'll allow you to relocate it anywhere you want. You can release those keys, continue to draw, hold shift to stretch, hold control to move left and right again, and then control alt to completely relocate, and then release, and there's your shape. Parabola has its own movements. You drag that out, and then hit control. Whichever way the bend is going, control will move it in the other direction. Right now I'm dragging it. As I drag it this way, if I do the same thing, but then hit control, then it inverts the way that curve goes. And then you have a couple more options when it comes to drawing the triangles and the square. Let's look at the triangle. If I draw a few of these, stretch it out. If I hold control and shift, I can actually lean it into a sawtooth. And when we go to the square, if we draw a few of those, stretch them out. When we hold control and shift on this, we can make smaller squares. You can select your controllers in a couple of ways. If you select the notes above them, it usually automatically selects your controllers. Now that we have the range tool as well, you can click and drag the range tool. Anytime you select your controllers, you're given these various options in this kind of control selected area. On the far left, you can tilt things down. And on the far right, you can do the same thing, tilt it down or up. If you hold Alt key when you do this tilting, it actually compresses the data. What does that mean exactly? When you're tilting things, everything kind of moves at the same speed. But when you do the compressing option, longer controllers will move quicker and the shorter controllers will move a little bit slower. Sometimes they'll raise, the longer ones will go down, kind of giving you an average. That's what happens when I hold Alt and pull down here on the left. If I go over on the right and I tilt it down, they move quickly. If I hold Alt and drag, they kind of move in this compressed fashion. Again, some of these velocities go down, other ones go up. As I move towards the middle, not exactly in the middle, I have the option to move vertically. The same thing applies here. Everything's going to go down fast. But if I go exactly in the middle, where it says scale vertically, what's going to happen here is the longer ones are going to go down fast, but the shorter ones will go down a little bit slower, again, giving you this kind of average movement. Then as we come down to the side, everything moves around what's called the absolute center. But if I hold Alt, kind of drags around what's called the relative center. When you do this, you'll see differences on how the left and the right tilt in relation to each other. Best way to understand this is take any kind of data that you have down here. Again, select it with the range tool. Tilt it on the left and watch what happens. Tilt it on the right and watch what happens. Hold your Alt key and tilt it on the left. Hold your Alt key and tilt it on the right and see what happens. Drag it down from a little bit off center. Drag it up and down from the exact center. You're going to see slightly different changes in the data every time you do this. And then finally go down to the right, drag that up and down, and then hold your Alt key, and again, drag it up and down and watch the difference. Once you do this with a few different types of data, in this example I used pitch bend, and I switched it over to velocity, you'll quickly get an idea of how to move around this controller data. And then there's one last option to look at. If you go to your toolbar, right-click in a blank area, and come down and make sure the option that says Auto Select Controllers is checked. I'll give you this little button here. When this is turned on, if I select any notes, controller below it is also selected automatically. If I turn this off and I select some notes, the controller data is no longer selected. If it's not selected and I move these notes over, then it has no effect on the controller data below it. On the other hand, if I press this select button, I select some notes, which also selects the controller data. If I move these notes over, they also overwrite the controller data below them. So again, depending on what you're trying to achieve, that's two separate operations that you can have there. So go take your new skills of using the controller lanes and how to move the data on the controller lane, and you'll have just that much more control over how your music sounds. All right, it's going to wrap it up for today. As always, if you haven't already, click the link in the description of this video to learn how you can get access to the all-new Digital Audio Manual Preferred. It's the clear, step-by-step solution showing you not only the tips, but all the secret and typically never talked about features that'll take you to a higher level of using your software. If you've been searching for an all-in-one solution to take you from start to finish and learning Cubase and Wavelab and other music software, this is exactly what you've been looking for. So click on the link in the description and come and be part of the clear path to a better learning experience. So today we had a good long look at what the controller lanes are. We started out looking at different snap options, changing the grid, learned how to draw articulations, move our controllers into an automation lane. We got into a real detailed discussion of the line tool and all the modifiers you can use on that. We got into a discussion of selecting the controller data and all the tilting controls that are available. And then we ended up talking about auto-selecting our controllers. And we'll continue to learn all these different features and functions in Cubase. As always, it's great to have you guys here, and I'll see you on the next video.